Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight or this evening, wherever you may be. Armando and I are here on the West Coast. As some of you may already know, if you're a regular, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. And we have Jillian this evening talking about macro, coming to us from Minnesota, right?
Minnesota.
No, I should say Minnesota, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
All
Hey,
right,
guys.
as usual, as we're getting settled, give us a shout out in the chat box. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And quick housekeeping notes, audio and visual. If you are having issues, let us know in the chat box as well. And let's open up the questions box, see where everybody's coming from here. All right, can you see it, Armando, as well?
Yes, I can.
Oh, look at that. Here they are. Here they are. Hi, everybody. New York in the house. Hello, Minnesota. Oh, Minnesota in the house. San Antonio, California, New Jersey, Chicago.
Lowell,
Oh, hi, Gail.
Massachusetts.
A little bit of everywhere.
Yes.
Tampa, Wisconsin, hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. And as you are aware, we are going to talk about macro, or Miss Jillian Bell as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them up in the questions box that you are typing in right now. We do see them. And you may not see everybody else's questions is because if we don't answer it directly, then it won't post up there. But be rest assured, we do see your questions. So definitely type them up there. And we will have a Q&A at the end, usually about 15 minutes at the end. Or if you have a question that is pertaining to an image or whatever Jillian may be talking to, I will jump in and ask that for you. And also I will have Armando here will be in the background helping me with fielding questions as well. So bear with us if we don't get to everybody's, but we'll try. And if not, Jillian will be happy to answer them post webinar through her social platforms that she will have up during her talk. All right, let's see. Okay, so looks like everybody haven't. Oh, hi, Gino. Gino asked Armando, where did you get the Tamara neon light from? And actually, I believe he has it projected onto his TV screen there. Clever, Armando.
Yeah, that's just a slide from my presentation that I'm simply projecting on the TV. You're absolutely right.
Oh, we have Melbourne, Florida. Hello, Teresa. I'm actually from, I'm original Floridian myself. Currently in Los Angeles, and as well as Armando. He's right up the few exits from me. We have the good weather.
It depends on your perspective. It is snowy here and 30 degrees, and I'm a happy camper here.
I know
you
are.
Guys can keep your sun.
That is true. Jillian, for those of you who know, she is a true cold weather person.
No, baby. I love it. A quick note for Francine's question. She is not visible, the chat at this end. Does she need to go under, or do they need to go under the questions tab or the chat tab?
Either, it doesn't matter, the questions or the chat, we will see your input there. If you may not see what other people are posting, is because if we don't directly answer them, then it won't go live, but we do see everything unless it's, everybody right now is just chiming in where they're coming from. So if there's a question we're going to answer directly, then we will answer it and it'll post up live. Otherwise, you won't see everybody's because there's just going to be too many, because currently we have over 500 people right now. So yeah, that's just, even if you were to see the chat live, it's just going to be too much.
Okay, I got a few people here saying that the audio isn't working.
On whose?
Okay. On their end, I'm assuming.
Let's see.
Test on my end. Only respond if you cannot hear me. If you can, that is fine. Don't worry about it.
Oh, she said she just checked and she can hear that now.
Okay, good.
Oh, Steve from North Hollywood. Wow, nice. I used to live in North Hollywood. Nice, right up over the valley, as they say. Oh, San Diego,
Hmm,
70, of course. It's 70 and sunny in Southern Cal all the time, right? All day.
that's gorgeous. I saw Calgary. I've been there once and I need to get back. It's a beautiful city up there. Idaho
Uh,
Falls. Go ahead.
Jason, you don't see the presenters, you don't see our talking heads right now. You may need to, when you logged in, I know sometimes a lot of windows pop up, so it might be hidden in behind one of your other windows or something. So
Hmm.
maybe that's it.
Like if you can see my full screen, now I can only see my PowerPoint presentation, but if I zoom out, the go-to talking heads are actually on a completely separate screen. Maybe you just have to kind of exit full screen mode or
Or there's also a
just make,
setting where you can
go
like
ahead.
choose either, there's also a setting like if you want to choose just to see the speaker speaking or, everybody currently cameras on or something like that. There's a setting where you can click on that as well for as far as which webcams you see.
Cool.
So I think everybody looks good. Okay. Oh, Amy, whose video is frozen? Is it me or Jillian or it also could be, I mean, so far I see my video looks like it's moving fine, I think. And Jillian's moving fine. Armando's moving
Mhm.
fine. You could check your Wi-Fi as well. I mean, because everybody is on probably internet a lot these days. Okay, she's good now. Chat icon, Robert, is actually, if you, there's a little control panel right here, probably somewhere right here. And there's like, should be some drop-down menus, whether a chat or a questions box, either. You can use either. We will see your input and input there. Okay, cool. Everybody says they're good. Oh,
Right.
Cool, cool.
from everything is good from India, as in the country. I mean, I would think so.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow.
Hmm. It is not out of
Uh,
the norm to get international participants. And thank you
yeah.
guys for being here. Thank you for finding us. This has been a lot of fun this last year, just creating new content and talking. Like the world gets smaller when we're able to reach out like this. So
And,
it's a good time.
and talking about smaller,
Someone's
Yeah.
setting. Whose video is frozen that you're seeing? Let me see. Is it Jillian's or? Jimmy, you're on a good Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Video, audio,
Yep.
events,
Yep.
bit.
Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely the year of webinars. How many people are on? Actually, we are currently over 500 and rising.
540 so far, 541.
Yes. So actually, we're just gonna get right into it. I don't want to waste anyone else's time, and we've been going overtime, so I just want to get right into it. I'll introduce
Mhm.
Jillian right here and enjoy the webinar. We will pop off again. We welcome questions in the background. We'll get to as many as we can, and there will also be a Q&A at the end. And don't worry if you can't see anything or hear anything. It's being recorded, and you will get a follow-up email in a day or so with the link to this webinar. All right. Without further ado. Here's Jillian.
Here's me. Thank you, Janet. Thank you,
You
Armando.
all.
It is good to see you guys again, even though it's virtually. There we go. Before I really get started into the meat and potatoes, as we've said a couple of times while we were setting up this presentation for you, I want to make sure everyone's familiar with the Tamron website, tamron-usa.com. You'll see that on the bottom left-hand side of my screen. This is a website that's been revamped over the last 6 months, over the last year, and it is the one-stop shop for everything Tamron, product information, lens reviews, specific lens reviews, and sample galleries, and how to choose your right lens. Lots of how-to content, connections with the social media, and like how to find us, tamronusa.com. This slide is specifically here to give you guys a shout out. You know, my team Tamron out in the field, all you photographers who own Tamron glass. If it's registered, you automatically become part of the Tamron VIP club. You need 3 lenses purchased from 2011 and forward to present day. Basically, we gather all the registrations and we tally them up in January. And in February next month, we're going to really start getting out those welcome letters to the new members and some of those annual bonus rebates. So keep an eye for that. If you need to know if your gear is registered, just reach out to customer service. It's under the support section, again, on that website, tamron-usa.com. So a lot of questions in the chat, so that is great. Some of those points I'm definitely going to talk about. If I forget or if it's really gone past my consciousness, again, use that chat at the end, and Janet and Armando will be helping me monitor that. Again, my name is Jillian Bell. I'm one of the other national technical representatives here for Tamron USA. I'm a photographer first, I'm an educator by heart, and I've always been an artist my entire life. I saw a quick question about how did I become this, or how do you become a Tamron ambassador? Specifically for me, becoming a national technical representative started on the retail level. So I was working at a retail store here in Minnesota. I was working freelance on the side doing some commercial photography, and my local sales rep reached out. I had the opportunity to apply, and I became a part of the family just under 10 years ago. So macro is my specialty. This is something that even in a landscape, even in a portrait shoot, macro is something that my mind always gravitates towards. So you guys are in for a treat today. Find me online, Facebook and Instagram mostly. Bell Tamron USA is my handle. That's what I go for. Come connect, come ask me questions. I'm always available. All right, let's get into the topics. Again, run time's about 45 minutes. I like to kind of keep this into a mindset. No, come back, focus. Sorry about that. So that we can really customize this conversation after the fact. I'm going to get into the definitions of macros in my mindset, explanations of the features. This is specifically geared towards the very popular 90mm macro, but these are some tech tips and these are some technologies that you will find on many of the Tamron lenses and how we can use those for handheld photography in all weather at all times of day. Some insect tips are going to be thrown in there, and then really getting into the mindset. So what I do when I approach a macro scene after we've identified our subject, we're going to look for the light. We're going to check our backgrounds. I'm going to throw in some extra tips for flower photography, for photographing jewelry, and then ending this off with just some everyday inspiration. Again, trying to re-examine our homes, these places where we are every day, and trying to find the extraordinary in our everyday lives. First thing that I want to get out of the way, just definitions. In photography, in these conversations, we really get bogged down with the ratios. Why are they important? Are they important? How do we wrap our brains around this? What is true macro? What is close-up photography? What is micro photography? Really, the big things to keep in mind is, as long as you're getting the photographs you want to capture, nothing else matters. Work on a technique that you need to get better at. Use if it works for you, if it's not the best way to do it, but it's your way to do it. Sorry about the focus, everybody. Just keep at it. Close-up photography is basically anything that's a 1:4 ratio or quarter life size, 25% life size. That's what we talk about. When we talk about true macro, this is a 1:1 representation of our subject if we were to place it on the sensor. The one in the middle, that's going to be half life size or 1:2 macro. Think about this as, you know, if back in our DSLR days, or if you have a mirrorless camera and you can see your sensor, you can physically see your sensor in your camera body. Now imagine if you take a quarter, don't actually do this, huge disclaimer, do not do this. But if you take a quarter and put it on your sensor plane, what would that image look like if we printed out a 16:20? Again, do not physically do this. You will hurt your camera, you will damage your sensor. But think about this hypothetically, 16:20, a true life-size macro of that quarter would be an image that has a quarter that is 16 inches in diameter. It's 1:1 representation as if we were to place that quarter on our sensor. Half life size in the middle, same 16:20 print. That quarter is now 8 inches in diameter. On the left-hand side, close-up photography, same quarter, same image, 16:20, but now that quarter is 25% life size. It's 4 inches in diameter. Again, just to kind of give you a visual of what we mean. I like close-up photography, anything that's about a 4:6 in size. That's kind of where my mind goes. True macro, one-to-one macro is going to be like stamp size. So imagine exploring the world one stamp size at a time, an inch by an inch. Takes a while, and it's totally worth it. Now, in more of an artistic mindset, for me, the definition of close-up photography is basically just the art of highlighting smaller subjects. At the end of the day, it's a recognizable subject in an environment or just highlighting a specific thing that you can tell what it is. In this case, really cool acrylic art sculptures in an airport. When I was out traveling about a year or so ago, they were small. These little scenes were about 4 inches high, but I really thought they were interesting the way the light was passing through it. So I'm doing close-up photography by highlighting these little vignettes, these little scenes. Even though they're small, it's recognizable. I can tell what it is, so it's close-up photography. Here's another example. It's a piano keys butterfly. I took this at the Butterfly Conservatory in Florida. I think it was Miami, could have been St. Augustine. They all kind of blend together. But if you can find butterflies in a greenhouse or in a conservatory, someplace where they're a little bit more controlled, this is a beautiful place to practice. And then we just got to think about what kind of lens do we use. This changes our background. The 90mm macro is very common, and we've isolated our subject, but you can still tell it's a butterfly. If we use more of a wide angle lens to do the same thing, still close up of this piano keys butterfly, but now this is at 20mm. This gives us a 1:2 macro, the Sony little primes that we came out with about a year ago, much more environmental. So sometimes it comes down to what focal length do I need to create the look that I want? Do I want something a little bit more environmental, or do I want something a little bit more isolated? Think about this in your own work. Wide angle versus telephoto. The trick with this is basically figuring out what the minimum focusing distance of your lens is. Now, I put this icon on here, the circle with a line through it, because just a little known fact, we measure minimum focusing distance from the sensor plane. We do not measure it from the end of the lens. So if you look at the top of your camera, whatever brand it might be, you will find this icon, circle with a line through it. And that's where we measure from. So if it says 9 inches, it's from your camera sensor. If it's 20 inches, again, it's from your camera sensor. Many of the lenses in the Tamron lineup have a superior minimum focusing distance, which basically means you can get closer to your subject without having to think about it. It just does that for you, gives you better detail. If it's a zoom lens, the trick is zooming the lens all the way out. So if I have, the very popular 18 to 400mm, minimum focusing distance is about 20 inches from the sensor plane. Zooming the lens all the way out to 400, getting within those 20 inches, gives me the most magnification within that range for that lens. It's different for every lens. Again, check out the website, or just really experiment. Sometimes I just might find something interesting, zoom the lens all the way out, start further back, focus on it, creep in a little bit, focus on it again, creep in a little bit, focus on it again. You'll get to a point where it gets too close and it just surges. That's too close. Back up a little bit. Again, don't overthink it. Find the system that works for you. But know that sometimes your lenses can get closer than you can think. They might. So basically, try it out, test your gear, reach out to us if you have any questions. Now, in comparison to close-up photography, again, my definition that I've kind of come up with over the years, when we talk about macro photography and more of an artistic mindset, this is a completely different way of thinking. It's about what do you find interesting about the subject you're photographing. It's less about what the subject is, but what do you physically find interesting about this thing and how can we highlight it? Going back to those butterflies, I love their wings. They're all so unique, kind of like snowflakes. We can kind of tell this is a butterfly wing because we know what butterflies are, but this macro photograph in comparison to the close-up that I showed you previously is about the lines, the repetition of shape, that texture, that design that we will see within that small subject. So this is macro. Similarly, going back to that quarter, you ever notice on the state-specific quarters, they've all got hand-carved designs on them. So we can use macro photography to highlight those designs. Again, what do we find interesting about the quarter, about the subject? They're all different. See the difference? Getting into the lens tech a little bit, the fun thing about being a technical representative is I really find ways to make the technology work for me. One of the best advantages about being a macro photographer is that you can photograph macro photography at any time of day, in any kind of weather. It doesn't matter if you get up before the sunrise to get that perfect location. You don't have to stay up until the moon sets to get those Milky Way shots. If it's raining, if it's sunny out, if it's the middle of the afternoon, we can take great macro photographs. Now, specifically, again, I'm going to highlight that 90mm macro, but know that this technology transfers into the other lenses in the Tamron line. Basically, you know a lens is higher quality if it's got more letters behind it, and knowing what those letters mean is the key. First two, we talk about the autofocusing system. There's many different autofocusing motors in the Tamron line, depending on speed, performance, and size. What does that specific lens need? USD, in this case, is ultrasonic silent drive. It's the fastest autofocusing motor that Tamron makes. It's big, it's beefy, it's quick. We find it on sports lenses like the 70-200 2.8. We find it on the 90 macro because we need to really run the distance between 11 inches and infinity really quickly to try to find our subject. VC is a vibration compensation. That's the stabilization that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. This allows us to do handheld photography in a pretty significant way. Another place I like to go to practice and just kind of get my macro mindset on is a model train museum. We've got all these teeny tiny little people, all these little vignettes. But the problem is you cannot bring a tripod in many times without special arrangements. The lighting is generally pretty poor. So we are stuck with shallow depth of field, which I'm perfectly fine with. I love shallow depth of field and very slow shutter speeds unless you're totally cranking your ISO higher than you need it to be or want it to be. So the VC in your lenses will help you kind of get over that. So this is VC off in that 90mm handheld, again, 2.8. When I turn it on, look what happens, 1/8 of a second. This is another opportunity to test how slow can you go, because everybody's a little bit different. Depending on if I'm really thirsty or tired, or if I haven't had my coffee in the morning, or if I've had too much coffee in the morning, you know, stability is a fleeting thing. Figure out what works for you. But this opens up the world to a whole nother view of handheld photographic opportunities. Another example, 1/20th of a second, VC on. Having a picnic. Did not realize that these little bees liked whitefish. I was having just fish and chips, walleye here in Minnesota. And of course, after the meal, I was sitting around talking to my friends, and this bee kept coming by and actually like eating parts of my fish and flying away with it and coming back. We were in this nice shaded little pergola, and so there wasn't a lot of light. 1/20th of a second, waited till he was like not flying, but like just really stable. And you can do this at a 1/20th of a second. The biggest key with insects, especially moving subjects, if you can get a fast shutter speed, do it. 125th of a second, 250th of a second is ideal in these situations. Unless, again, they're staying completely still, center weighted focusing point is going to be, again, a huge lifesaver. The center of your sensor is the most sensitive to fine focus, and we can crop for composition after the fact. The other thing I wanted to mention is just that moisture-proof technology. Some of the lenses, you know, never submerge them fully, but think about a rainstorm where your wipers are on medium. Generally, you'll be fine. Don't be scared to take your lenses out with you. Worst case scenario, get a rain cover from your local camera store. They're cheap. You can keep them in your glove box, your camera bag, your backpack, your desk drawer, whatever. Get a bunch of them. That's your safety. But here you can see all the gasketing that's built into the lenses. Check the back cap. If you see a little rubber gasket on the back of your lens, that's a quick indicator that your lens is moisture and dust resistant. Gets you out into early morning dew type photographs or really pollinated flowers in the springtime. It's not going to affect the gear. Another cool durability feature is this fluorine coating that is going to be, again, on some of our lenses. This is another element that we use in our lenses to repel dust, water, and oil, keeping our images sharp, and just keeping our lenses protected against those elements, because again, you want to go out and be inspired in any kinds of acclimate weather, and these kind of technologies are going to help you do that. Here's that early morning dew again. Definitely we'll find backlit raindrop sitting in a ditch somewhere on the side of the road. It's beautiful, all the striations of the lines, trying to make something every day a little bit more special. Not being worried about handheld or the rain or anything like that. I know my gear is gonna be there for me. Last little thing, and then we'll get into the actual technique of photographing macro, is just what this little switch means. This is the distance limiter. We find this specifically on the 90mm macro. We find this specifically on the 150 to 600 G2. And basically what this means is it helps tell the lens in really low contrast situations where your subject is. Again, specifically in the case of the 90, we can focus anywhere between 11 inches to infinity. And if it's out of focus, it's gonna look out of focus the same at all distances. So full is where I leave it most of the time. It's going to look at that full range of distance and, you know, again, look for contrast, lock in on that focus for you with little or no trouble at all. But again, in those really low contrast situations where my camera might be hunting just a little bit too much, you can put it on this middle position, which is in this case for the 90, 1.5 feet to infinity. And then we've got the closest position here, which is 11 inches to 1.5 feet. Again, just helping the lens out, telling it where to look. If you're fortunate to have the tap-in console in this specific situation, an added feature is that you can customize this distance limiter switch to the way you like to photograph, the way you like to shoot. You can actually change where the ranges are in the bottom and the middle position. I like to open up that close focusing range a little bit. 11 inches to 18 inches is not a lot of distance, so I open it up to about 2 feet so I know where my subject's gonna be. Again, just the cool attributes of technology and how you can, again, let your gear work for you in however way you like to photograph. All right, technique. The main conversation I wanted to have today is just how do you see your subjects? How do I build an image? How do I work through the mental process from start to finish? Being at home and really just being on location, the first thing you want to do is find a subject. Find something interesting. That's a minimum. What do you find interesting, again, about the thing that you're photographing, and how can we highlight it? And then I always look for light, and then I always check my background to make sure there's no distractions. So that's simply it. If you take home anything from today, take home that. Find your subject, find your light, tweak your backgrounds, cut out any distractions. This is, again, that macro mindset. If you're fortunate to have a hobby shop nearby, again, love those hobby shops, find teeny tiny little figurines. It's like portrait photography, but tiny. And you can build these little scenes. It's a really great way to practice because it'll help you find the light. It gives you a subject to focus on. In this case, teeny tiny little dinosaurs. I'm a little sad for this Stegosaurus because he's kind of in trouble. He's up a tree without anything to get away from the T-Rexes there. But I digress. Middle of the day. Again, the great thing about being a macro photographer, many of the photographs I take are in the middle of the day. I take a walk during lunch, but the lighting is very poor. It's generally direct. There's lots of contrast. There's lots of distracting shadows. How do we find our subject in such a way? Really apologize for the constant autofocus. Come back, thank you. To use this to the advantage. The lighting will change the mood of your photograph. So in this case, this is direct light, lots of shadows. Put my little T-Rex guy on the spruce tree out in my backyard, super simple. Just for a lighting demonstration, I use a simple thing. I use a reflector. It's got a white and a silver side. You can also use a diffuser, which is a clear version of this. It's just got a frosted pane of fabric that you can, again, diffuse that light, make it softer. Because what we want to do traditionally is just help even out these shadows and make the scene either more purposefully lit or more diffused, softer. Comparing this to the silver side of the reflector. So this, again, is that natural lighting situation, overhead light, terrible shadows, not good highlight on our subject. If I have my light source, so in this case, my sun is coming up from in front of me, I'm going to capture this light and then allow it to hit on my subject. Better example. This is my subject. My light source is coming from over here, and I put my reflector on the opposite side so it catches the light and bounces it on the shadow side. So we have nice, even, illumination in our shadows and our highlights. Comparing this to the diffuser, much softer. So in this case, again, we've got our subject, little pencil, sunlight's coming from here. In this case, we use our reflector in between our subject and our light source so that we capture that light and diffuse it, making much, much softer. The biggest difference here is the look. So this is softer. This gives you a little bit more background detail. In the first one, it's a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more theatrical. Love the dark background here. It really helps our subject shine forward and isolate that moment. And again, all I'm doing is reflecting that light back in. So we're catching it, we're reflecting it back into our subject and filling in those shadows areas. Sometimes it works for the advantage. Again, looking for your subject in the light is going to be step number one. I love the contrast here because the paper boy is well lit, the dog is really lit in the front side of the tree. And then the background with all the busyness, all the people, they're in the shadows. This is just natural daylight, looking for those scenes that make dramatic photographs. That's key number one. So here's a good example. California wild poppies. This was out near San Diego. I don't specifically remember when. It was a couple years ago. But this is the first time I realized poppies were orange. Here in Minnesota, I only see them right around Veterans Day. And they're always red on a little wire that I can pin on my lapel. Never seen them orange. So I wanted to go photograph that. But again, it was the middle of the day. So the problem was here, the lighting is terrible. Not really sure what to do. How do I combat this? I found my subject, but now let's look at the light. Step number two, even out that light. In this case, again, using a diffuser to capture that light and basically just create a little piece of shade that my subject can live in so that the exposure is more even. I've even done this with my own shadow. So I'll have the light on my back and I'll use my shadow to give my exposure a little bit more of an even feel, put my subject in shadow, and you can very easily even out your exposure that way. And then you compose. So we found our subject, we evened out the light source, and then we took a photograph that has a little bit better composition to it. Much more dramatic. This is a close-up image of those poppies. I wanted to show all the little ones in the background. Using the 70-200 f4 at 210 millimeters, getting within its minimum focusing distance, which was about 3 feet. Created a pretty cool shot. With flowers specifically, looking for either deformed petals, looking for unique opportunities of specific flowers will help your photograph stand out. Easiest thing here is just, again, double check your background. Sometimes changing the background will change the feel of the photograph. Here's another just quick example of, I don't know what these are called either, but I call them ditch daisies. They're teeny tiny little daisies that are about 2 inches in diameter, and they grow tall in the ditches here. First subject, it's backlit. You can see that my sunlight is illuminating through the petals, giving it a luminance, giving it saturation, beautiful midday light. In this first case, I picked one up and pulled it down and used the rest of the grasses and the daisies in the background to have more of that golden yellow color, you know, photographing it from a downward angle. In the second one, I'm photographing it with the dark woods in the background, again, more spruce trees. So same lighting situation. This one is using a light background. This one is using a dark background. And then I photographed a third one, again, just for an example set to show the nice bright blue sky. In this case, the sun is hitting my subject instead of behind, reflecting through my subject. That's how we get the nice blue sky.
Hey, Jillian.
Yes.
So Laura asked here, can you get the same effect of a reflector by using a fill light?
Meaning, can I show that right here, right now?
No, I'm not sure. She just popped up saying if you get the same effect of a reflector by using the fill light. I'm not sure.
Oh, I see. Hold on. Can you get the same effect of a reflector by using a fill light? Oh, yes. Of course. So the question is, we're trying to balance out the sunny side and the shady side. If you don't have a reflector to capture that light, I'm flipped around, and fill in that shady side, you can use an LED light too. I always have one of these kind of hanging around. There's many different kinds, many different shapes. I recommend one that is dimmable from bright to dim. And then you can also change the color temperature from warm to cool. Just gives you a little bit more control. But the same sort of thing here. In this case, if my sun's coming from this way, using an LED is going to help fill in that shady side so that you have a really nice even exposure. Yeah, good question. Oh, I see. Am I shooting in manual? We are getting to that. Good question, Andre. Here, I jumped ahead of myself using that LED light. This is bouquet of flowers that I bought maybe a week prior to this photo. Simple one light setup. I love the fact that only one of them was left that still had life to it. All the other ones were wilting and kind of drying out. And so in this case, I used an LED light and got it close to my subject just outside a camera frame. And it was pretty dim, maybe 10, 20%, so a very soft light. But having the soft light just hit my subject close to the flowers here dropped out my background, because the light on my background, just like we saw with the sunlight and the shadow, was so much darker in comparison to that LED light that it just goes to black. Super simple. And a node to photographing in manual, what mode do I use? I honestly think about aperture. I am comfortable using that manual mode in my photographs, but 99% of the time I use aperture priority, because for me, that changes, again, the look, the mood. And do I want more of an ethereal isolated look, or do I want more of a flat focused look on texture and lines? It just depends. I very rarely use f2.8 unless I absolutely need as much light as possible, because in macro land, it is very, very, very shallow. And you don't get much detail that way. It's very ethereal, especially if you're using the prime lenses, the 35, the 45, the 90, the 20, the 24, again, the other 35. Prime lenses are great for dreamy, soft, shallow depth of field. It's one of their strengths. And so I'm going to use an f4, f5.6, f8 maybe for those more shallow depth of fields look. And then in autofocus, again, keep it simple, I'm going to use a selected point autofocusing mode. So I'm going to move my focus point to exactly where I want it to be in focus, and then use my aperture to control it. Long depth of fields here in comparison have a flattened focus look on textures and lines. So this again is stylized. Many of my macro photographs are a little bit more ethereal. They're a little bit more focused on shallow depth of field, because that's my style. I like a very isolated subject. I like a soft, more floated look. The long depth of fields like f11, f22, they get really flat. And I like depth and dimension in the work that I do. Keep in mind that you may need a tripod. So again, going through that macro mindset, I figure out what aperture that I kind of want to focus on by just maybe putting it in aperture priority, auto ISO, and just running it 2.8 to f22, figuring out which one is the look that I want. And then in aperture priority mode, I'm going to change the ISO to match the shutter speed that I can work with. If I'm on a tripod, shut your stabilization off, no matter what brand you use. And feel free to go ISO 100 or ISO 200. Go as low as you can, because that is going to give you better color, better clarity, less noise. But you might be 10 seconds, you might be 2 seconds, you might be 100th of a second, who knows. But anything that is slower than you can physically handhold, put it on a tripod, lock it down, let that time just fill in the detail. If I need a faster shutter speed because I need to handhold that photograph, if I cannot lower the aperture because of the depth of field that I want, I have to raise the ISO to get the shutter speed that I need. Does that make sense to everybody? Because those three elements work together. I set the aperture first, and then I change my ISO to get the shutter speed that I need, depending on if I can handhold it or not. Sometimes it's a mix of both. So in this case, this is actually a 2-image stack. I always get a question on focus stacking in my macro classes, so I just wanted to touch on that. Basically, I focus stack for one of two reasons. Either I cannot get the shutter speed that I need to get the detail that I want, So if I'm outside and my flower's blowing around, I can't clamp it down enough, but I want a long depth of field to really capture the full shape of that flower. I might have to take 8, 9, 10 different photographs focusing on the front, going all the way to the back, and then stitch them all together using a third-party program. That's very rare. If I'm taking pictures like that, I'm bringing them in the studio, I'm controlling the scene, and I try not to spend more time on my computer than I need. So that's like very rare, but it's possible. More commonly, it's for a look like this, where I need a long enough depth of field to get the subject in focus, but I don't want to ruin that ethereal, like soft, floaty feel. So this is a simple 2-image stack using Photoshop, and I'll show you how I did it. These are the first 2 original photographs. So this one on the right-hand side, this is at f22. Nice bright day, didn't need a tripod, had my stabilization on, but I hated the background. Look how much detail we have here. Completely wrecks the look, flattens the scene. The mushroom kind of blends in with everything else. f2.8, to get the ethereal feel, you'll lose the texture of the mushroom. So look up quick mask mode if you're a Photoshop user. This is a save the day moment. Basically, you go into Photoshop and you create a layer for each image. The sharpest image is going to be on top. And then I use the magic wand selector, which is this guy right here, to kind of start the selection. So you can hold down shift and just kind of click around your subject, and it'll do a pretty good job of selecting most of it, but you won't get all of it. So you shift into quick mask mode, and you can erase the selected areas that you are, you erase these red parts, and that'll be your selected area. You can paint back in anything that accidentally got selected so you don't select it anymore. Again, go to Adobe's website, look up exactly how to do this, but it's called quick mask mode, and it is a game changer as far as your time and selecting all those little fine details. So when you exit quick mask mode, I've got my selection here. And then I refine it going into the selection. So like up on top, you have the select and you can refine it, and you can actually check out the radius, you can feather it. You've got, again, a little bit more control over the selection itself. And then I delete the background of the top layer. So this is quick mask mode. This is what happens when I exit it. You can see I've selected just the mushroom. And then you're left with a sharp mushroom on a soft background. You flatten it, save it as a JPEG, you're good to go. Easy peasy, right? Right on track. Photographing jewelry here. Just a quick tip if you want to get into product photography, if you want to photograph jewelry, keep in mind that these are reflective surfaces that you need to control the reflections to get good detail and to really showcase this piece. So I use a polarizing filter to help combat those reflections. I'm going to cut out reflections with black boards, and that is basically a piece of black tag board, or if you've got black construction paper, or if you have cardboard that you've spray painted with black matte spray paint, what have you. You stick it on a pencil and you put it really close to your subject. I should be better with props in this case. But again, if this is my subject and I've got an unruly reflection from my light that I can't control, get that blackboard right outside of your frame and it'll cut it out. You don't have to heal it. You don't have to clone it out after the fact. You just, use those blackboards to literally hide that reflection from your subject matter. It's hard to figure out where it's going to be. So for these sort of situations, I generally use a tripod that allows me to be hands-free. So I can, recompose my subject. I can have both hands to work with reflectors and lights and like just kind of fix and figure everything out. Always diffuse your light. If you really get into product photography, look into light tints. I've got a whole nother class about food and product photography that we're going to talk about next week. So look that one up, food and product photography, for a much more in-depth look at this technique. If you find something interesting that's behind glass, the best thing you can do here is get your camera as close to that piece of glass as you can, again, to cut down reflections. Because I don't want, this is a storefront walking around Times Square in New York, and I loved how this bracelet looked like a leaf, mixing urban and natural elements to create this beautiful piece of art. I wear black most of the time so that my bright colors are not going to reflect into my scene. And I put my lens without the lens hood as close to that piece of glass as I can. So again, we're going to cut out reflections from the street lights, from the cars, from passing people, and do the best you can. Here, flat light photography, using an extension tube, getting really, really close, creating a scene that kind of looks like mountains out of regular kitchen knives. Polarizing filter. This is an overhead LED light that I used, again, just to help illuminate my scene. Keep in mind that metal is really, really slippery. And so if you have rubber cement, double stick tape, this really helps. I've actually got little pieces of double stick tape in behind all of my different subjects so that they'll stay put. I don't want to bump the table. I don't want, someone to come running into the room or a dog to mess things up. Because if you spend time to really set up these different scenes, it can fall apart in an instant. And just using these little hacks, again, double stick tape is a wonderful friend and a great tool to help keep things where they need to be. Last little section, again, use that question chat bar. There's anything you want me to touch again on. The last couple slides I have for you is just some indoor inspiration, trying to, again, find these extraordinary scenes in your everyday life. This one, this is off of an old lawnmower that's sitting in my garage, believe it or not. Love the patina on the brass, love the crackling of the old rubber tubes, and just the simple color play of the red and the green on that old lawnmower. How do we highlight the ordinary? Keep your eyes open, folks. This one here, this is an Edison bulb. So you've seen those old timey looking light bulbs that you can use in your pendant lights and at your home to give it a more of a vintage look. Using 1-to-1 macro and a light bulb that's only on a dimmer switch, so it's really only on a little bit, you get this beautiful just detail of all the different filaments that are just starting to light up. This you definitely need stabilization for. Slow shutter speeds, not a lot of light, but a lot of great detail. Couple more. If you've learned to cook over this whole time, this whole past year, or if you just have a love for cooking, look at those ingredients. How can you take a little time and photograph those ingredients before you put them in your dish? Simple clove of purple garlic here. Loved this little area, all the texture there around the core. Dark cutting board on the background. This kind of reminded me of an acrylic or an oil painting, which is why I wanted to highlight it. It's just garlic. Lastly, a cassette tape. Now this is kind of old tech mixed with new tech, but the magnetic ribbon here on the cassette tape, I've always thoroughly enjoyed that texture of that movement back and forth. And zoomed out a little bit so you can have the sprockets and you can have a little bit of that detail, just so you can kind of tell what it is a little bit. But again, in a macro photograph, it's about what do you find interesting about this subject that you have in front of you, and how do you best highlight it? All in all, I want to thank you guys for your time today. This has been a huge class. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. I know it's very foundational, but please stay connected. I hope this gave you a good look into the start of macro mindset, and you can take some of these techniques home with you in your own work.
Thanks so much, Jillian. As always, your macro work is amazing and fun at the same time. So yes, we have plenty of questions for you.
Cool.
You're ready. Okay, so I guess some rapid fire questions real quick. So do you shoot in handheld? I know you mentioned some you did, some you use a tripod, because some people are like, how do you, within millimeters, how are you able to handhold?
Traditionally, I am a handheld artist. I'm a freestyle macro photographer, honestly, because sometimes inspiration just comes at you really, really fast. So I'm going to use the VC. I'm going to use that stabilization whenever possible. I do get more consistent, great photographs when I use a tripod, when I slow this process down and think about the photos I want to create. And I also most likely will use my tripod if I'm in studio setting up a scene, just so I can be hands-free. But if I'm out in the world walking around, it's handheld night and day all the time.
Yeah, same here. I'm kind of a hand holder as well. Can you explain the distance limiter again?
Yes. So the distance limiter switch, this is a kind of top 10 question for that 90mm macro. Again, it is also seen on the 150 to 600. And basically what you're doing is you're telling the lens more specifically where your subject is so it can find focus on it faster. In the case of the 90mm macro, its minimum focusing distance is 11 inches from the sensor plane. So if you think of the span between 11 inches to infinity, an out of focus subject looks the same, whether it's at a foot, 3 feet, 100 yards out, it always looks out of focus. It looks the same to the lens. And so in those really low contrast situations where your lens is having a little bit of trouble, if you can tell the lens, no, it's further than 2 feet away, look towards infinity, or I know my subject is in the 1-to-1 macro range, only look up to 18 inches, it's going to help find focus faster. And so that's what that switch is for.
Yeah. Let's see. How do you, from Neil, how do you keep a dragonfly hold still so you can take a portrait?
They sit tight longer than you think, actually. I had one, I was out photographing the lilies last spring out on the lake, and I didn't even realize it, but this little dragonfly kept coming back to the same flower over and over and over again. So one of my favorite photographs is actually of this dragonfly. And I stood still, stopped moving around, just kind of took a breath, and I watched it for about 2, 3, 4 minutes. And I realized that it would continually go back to the same flower over and over and over again. And so that's where I focused my subject matter on. Continuous burst rate, and they'll sit there for a while. So you actually, if you know where they're going to land, because you've watched the behavior, it makes it a whole lot easier. Colder temperatures and sugar water are 2 other life hacks that you can try too.
Oh, speaking of cold weather, somebody asked, any tips on shooting in cold weather?
Yeah, keep your lenses outside longer than you can stand. This is extreme cold. So most Januaries are 35, 60 or 60 below zero here in the Midwest. If you bring your lens from that cold extreme inside your car or your porch or your home and then expect to go right back out to photograph, your lenses are going to fog up like crazy. So think about them as a house plant you're taking home from the store. I'm going to keep them in my camera bag so that that temperature is a little bit more isolated, and then it cools down and warms up more slowly. You won't get the fog. Sometimes I'll get an ice cooler, like one of those plastic old-timey coolers, and just keep my camera in there. That helps too. Yeah, keep your batteries on an inside jacket pocket so that they stay warm. They'll stay longer life for you. And then, yeah, just keep your camera outside until you're absolutely done shooting, and then you can bring everything back inside. It does just fine.
Perfect. A lot of people asking regarding extension tubes. What is your view regarding extensions tubes in macro work?
Yes, I like them. I don't know. When we talk about extension tubes, we're basically cheating the lens to get closer, get better magnification than it can natively. They traditionally come in a 3-lens set. In these cases, I am using either a tripod or center weighted autofocus or manual focus, because the autofocus in the whole thing is going to be so hard to find and it's going to be very frustrating. So start with the skinniest one and get used to that, and then work your way up into stacking all 3, and you can get like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, better than life size with the 90 macro. On the 45mm prime, that's been a very popular lens over the last couple of years. You can get 1-to-1 macro with the 45mm and the 36mm extension tube, so the thickest extension tube in the kit. But I'm using manual focus, and the working distance is so small. That's the biggest hindrance to extension tubes. Your working distance is like inches, not even 1/4 of an inch. And so basically manual focus to minimum, and then you move your camera in until it pops into focus. And it's basically going to be right past the point where you think you're going to run into your subject. And just have patience and play around with it. And yeah, they work out really well if you get the hang of it.
Nice. And another popular question was, do you ever use flash or speed light? Why or why not?
Traditionally, I don't. Janet, I know you do more than I do. I specifically like available light. I like LED lights because I have more control over the scene. and I can see exactly where those shadows and those highlights are going to fall. If I'm doing something for commercial photography, I will use strobes because you will get better crispness and clarity with flash. But for most of my work, I like available light. I like LEDs. Again, just because I can see it better. And
Yeah,
it's more accessible.
I'm actually starting to get lazy using lights too. Like available light is just easier.
I mean, the thought process is the same. Like using flash light is light. The only difference is, do you get it for a quick flash, or do you see the light that's around you, and that you know, there's less things you have to carry around with you. So it's more accessible to use available light.
Yeah, that's what I mean, like carrying it.
Yeah, but the crispness that you get from using flash, you cannot get with available light. Like there's just a tackiness to it that's three-dimensional, and it's pretty cool. But you see it the same way. You know, you have a one light setup, or you reflect it back in, or you use two lights at 45-degree angles. You think about it the same way. It just takes a little bit more time to set it up.
And another one that's popping up as popular, rails, macro rails. Any using that, or do you use one? And I know a couple people earlier asked about macro rails, so if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, macro rails are a great accessory. This is, again, a way to fine tune your focus. This is on a tripod, really slowing down your process and really being exact with that focus point. I will use those slide rails if, again, I'm setting up a scene that's teeny tiny. I'm talking maybe a ½ inch, like tiny. You know, imagine going back to those T-Rexes, those teeny tiny little guys, and filling the frame with just like taking a portrait of that T-Rex. You need a slide rail, you need manual focus, you need extension tubes, all that stuff. It's so exact, and it has to be exact, because if your focus is off by a little bit in macro, you're off by miles. So I like them. They're expensive, but they're cool. No, go ahead.
Let's see. Can you explain what the lens is doing at high f-stops above f/22, like f/32 or 64?
What the lens is doing specifically? Well, the lens is doing just like it always does. It finds focus and it captures light, it captures the image. What the image does at those higher f-stops, you could see a little bit of pixel diffraction, especially in macro photography. Again, that's another term that you can keep in your vocab and look it up, pixel diffraction. And basically what that means is the light is bouncing around in those pixel buckets so long that it actually can affect sharpness on a macro level, on a really minute, teeny tiny little level, where your sharpness will not be as sharp as you think it should be. It's not necessarily noticeable at this point to the naked eye unless you're looking for it and you're blowing things up to wall size. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I will oftenly photograph things at f/32 if I absolutely need all of that depth of field. I'm not worried about it. But sometimes, again, if the sharpness is 100% necessary and you need to be as, you know, it's going to be wall size, so you want it as sharp and as tack clear as it can be, use the focus stacking and get your depth of field that way. You just get better results.
A couple people are also asking, I guess they're looking to shoot snowflakes. I guess they're living in the snow right now. So any tips on shooting snowflakes? Do you need a magnifier or anything?
You need definitely extension tubes. You either need there's a lens that can do better than 1-to-1 macro. Tamron doesn't have one in their lineup currently. So what I do is I use the 90mm macro with all 3 extension tubes, and it's pretty much in a controlled situation. So I'm going to take a little bit of snow and I'm going to set it up on a piece of black felt, like actual fabric. I'm going to set up this scene, and it's going to be lit traditionally by a front light at about a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to take a secondary light or maybe a reflector at an opposite 45-degree angle so I can reflect that light and try to backlight it just a little bit. Haven't done it yet this winter. I need to try it again because it is hard. It's a lot of setup. The colder the mornings, the better it's going to be. So if you can get down when it's 0 degrees or 5 below, those snowflakes are going to be gorgeous.
Unfortunately, Armando and I we won't be doing any snowflakes.
Nope. I did take Armando out to shoot sundogs one morning and he almost froze. It was 20 below here and I was impressed. He did very, very well.
Almost. It took me 8 hours to thaw out. I was frozen.
That was amazing.
Minus 27 degrees. I've never been so cold in my life.
That's what happens when you have a layover in Minneapolis. I take you out.
Okay, circular polarizers as are said to reduce glare when shooting jewelry, but how about using one just to increase saturation when shooting insects, etc.?
Yes, that's a great idea. Polarizing filters have been known to also help with saturation and just the vibrancy of your image. Be careful with flowers. Flowers can get oversaturated really, really fast. So use raw. Don't use JPEG in like a landscape or a portrait mode. Especially portrait mode is going to highlight those reds and oranges for you. We do not want that. We want everything like just neutral and plain, so we can amp that up after the fact if the image calls for it. But raw is going to be great in a standard or faithful or neutral, you know, something in that low key sort of image setting. That's where the polarizer is really going to kind of help you out with those details.
Great, thank you. Coming from Lisa, what suggestions do you have for staging products / items for photography, which I believe you're going to cover next week?
I am. The food and product photography class is going to be the key there. We're going to talk about lighting setups, get good backdrops. So go find 12 by 12 tiles at the hardware store, little remnants of fabric that you can use in your backdrops. And it's all about the scene. It's all about the story that you're trying to create and the details you can include to kind of relay that in the image.
Now, is the lens always set to macro, or are some of these just close up? I guess he's referring to some of your images. Are they always set to macro, or are you using some telephoto?
Yeah, I use all the lenses for macro photography. It just like the focal length depends on the scene. Do I want it a little bit more environmental? So I'm going to use a wider angle, a 35 I love, the 20, the 45, those are going to be wider angle, more environmental macro photographs. Otherwise, it's going to be the 90, the 70 to 300 with an extension tube, or 70 to 210 f4 with an extension tube, these sorts of things. That gives me more of a compressed, isolated look. So again, what style do you want your photograph to take? And then from there, I'm not always photographing at 1:1 macro. It really depends on what the image is supposed to be. And the great advantage of having a lens that gives you that capability is that the macro is there when you need it. You're never going to need to go find another lens, because the fact that the Tamron lenses can automatically focus closer than their competition, this is an added advantage for versatility in your work.
Do you ever use a ring light for macro flowers?
Not as much as I used to. When we refer to a ring light, it's a round light that goes over your lens, and so you can shoot through it, get really great front light, traditionally in more of a flash setting than an LED constant light setting. I used to use it all the time. At this point, I've stopped using it because that ring light has a very flat, direct look to it. So we're hitting that subject with a really flat, direct light, and it just kind of takes all the dimension out of it. So if I am using a ring light, I'll take it off my lens and put it off to the side. Again, so I can get better detail, better dimension and shape of my scene through shadows and highlights.
Gotcha. Armando, here you are. Did you have any questions that you saw that I missed?
Let's see. I think there might have been one. Yeah. Is with my camera a new hashtag versus using hashtag Tamron?
You can use both. The main hashtags for Tamron are hashtag Tamron. We use hashtag Team Tamron for us that work in the industry because we are Team Tamron. But with my Tamron is the one that specifically our marketing department uses when they reshare their images on Instagram and Facebook. So that's the one I think that they're specifically looking for to help collaborate and share content. If I have any students or educators in the industry, use hashtag TamronEDU, And that helps me as far as Tamron EDU and the school market program help share what you guys are working on with your projects and in your school systems.
I overlooked a question. Sorry, a question about macro for newborn photography. Do you have any tips on that?
That is a good question. When it comes to newborn photography, the environment is key. Warm, long shoots, really comfortable, happy baby. I'm not a specialty at this at all, but the most traditional ones are going to be, you know, the hand shot, the ears, the nose, the little toes.
The feet, yeah, I like the feet.
The feet, yeah. F8, F11 is my kind of go-to in those scenes. Very soft light, so diffused light, either with a soft box and a strobe, or I honestly would prefer natural light in those scenes because newborn eyes are very, very sensitive to light, especially flashing lights. So use soft, constant light, and F8, something like that. You can handhold those for sure. Definitely handhold those shots.
Yeah. Have you ever tried freezing soap bubbles? I never thought of that.
Man, that's been a long time too. That's a good idea.
I didn't know that's a thing.
Yeah. You mix, you don't use regular soap, you use glycerin. It's a much stronger bubble. I've also blown up balloons and then put like a glycerin or like a sugar water solution around them and froze that. So that when you pop the balloon, you just have this little bubble. It's not the same, but it's kind of the same.
Let's see. What is it? Oh, what do you like for insect macro, as often you cannot get too close to the subject, example being getting a wing or the eye of a dragonfly? Oh, okay, gotcha. What lens? Sorry.
If it's an insect that does not want to be close to you, use the 150 to 600 with the 2x teleconverter. You can do half size macro or 1 to 2 macro with that combination. Your distance is about 3 feet from the sensor plane, so you're about 1.5 feet, 2 feet from the end of the lens. I've used this with my buddy's beehive, long cable remote or my app on my phone to trigger the camera, so that I am personally far away from this scene. But that's the best way to get really close-up shots of things that don't want you to get close to it. 150 to 600, 2x teleconverter is a good combination there. Trick is the same thing with the dragonflies. Sit back and watch them for a while. Figure out where do they frequent, which flower do they like, or bring sugar water and bait them along a little bit. But that way you can set it up on a tripod, get far away, and just kind of watch the flower and photograph the camera like that. You know what I mean? I did. Go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to. I remember this question earlier. Can I use a close-up filter for macro photography?
You can. The image quality is not going to be as good on the edges as using an extension tube with a non-macro lens or a true macro lens, but you can do it if that's what you have available. I saw a quick question about cropped censored cameras and how that makes a difference. Yeah. I don't know if that one was answered before.
Not yet.
Basically, you just have slightly better than 1-to-1. So the photograph, if you take 2 photos with the 90mm, one on a full frame and one on a cropped sensor camera, the one with the cropped censored camera is just going to look slightly more magnified because of that smaller sensor. That's it. The working distance should be the same. The depth of field should relatively be the same, but the crop censored camera will give you, in that regard, if you want the same image, you're going to get a little bit more working distance with that crop censored camera.
And let's see here. Do you use autofocus when you use the 150-600 with the 2x converter?
Yes. Center weighted focus, I will set it up in autofocusing mode, and then I will flip it to manual focus because I'm not right there on my camera. I don't want my camera to readjust, kind of like what's been happening during this presentation. I do not want that to happen. So I'm going to set it in autofocus and then switch it over to manual focus, or like tape it down or something so it doesn't move anymore.
Right.
Great question.
We're going to wrap it up. I think we got to most of the questions. And if we didn't, feel free. Definitely, Jillian will be happy to answer them directly for you if you hit her up on her social handles. And thank you to everybody for all the questions, a lot. And definitely check us out for next week. Jillian is back with us for product and food photography. So don't come hungry.
It's mostly food. Yeah, it's mostly food.
Right. So I've heard rumors through the grapevine that they should have known to come to that talk. I'm hungry, so.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet. Oh, you're in for a treat.
No, I know,
Good.
yeah. So I'll be in for a treat. I'll make sure I eat beforehand, right, Amanda?
Yeah, I'll have a snack ready for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so definitely, if you missed any parts of this, again, the webinar is currently being recorded and will be sent out in an email in a day or so. And if you're not getting it for some reason, double check your spam or junk folders. We've been having issues that it has been going to those folders. So we apologize if that's the case. And again, thanks to Jillian. Thank you for your time. Armando, thanks for helping with the questions in the background. And good night, everybody.
Bye
It's
all.
been great. See you later.
Bye.
That was really good. Thank you guys. I'll see you next week.